Bernie Sanders says U.S. should confiscate 100% of any money Americans make above $999 million. They can survive just fine. What do you think?
The entire tax system needs to be revamped. The middle class pays more of a burden than the billionaires do. It's ridiculous. Of course, that is just a political slogan by Bernie, and it is not the practical implementation of the idea. But they do need to apply taxes to the giant global megacorporations in an effective way. We know from the Panama Papers how extremely common it is for any wealthy people to hide their money from income taxes, and you don't have to be super rich to do this. So the solution needs to be on how the very wealthy interact with society in the USA, with taxes on land, with a generous lower limit exemption, and on consumption, taxes on your second yacht should be pretty high. And hey, as a fun idea, how about if the super wealthy contributes a huge amount to politics, or super PAC, then they have to match it with a tax payment. If they take a SCOTUS justice on lavish million-dollar vacations, they match that with a tax payment, etc.
I'll never understand why someone's 1 in 100 million chance of becoming a billionaire is more important to them than a guarantee of a basic social structure that helps everyone get a more fair. A lot of people have offered the counterpoint that this argument is incomplete at best and misleading at worst, and I concede, to a point. The majority of people against taxing the ultra-wealthy that I know have spoken about their mistrust of the government. That mistrust, and what about the government they don't trust, is a separate and much deeper conversation to me. See, this is why I left Facebook for Reddit. I would have just been hit with parroted talking points or cheap insults. Here, I'm given plenty to think about.
Confiscate is certainly a choice of words.
So maybe someone can try to explain this a bit. Would this apply to the value of the company's stock? Because to my knowledge most of the people in this category don't actually take home $1 billion plus in cash into their checking.
If only Thomas Piketty had written an entire book on how capital should function in the 21st century, giving modern governments a roadmap on how to execute this. Oh wait, he did edit. If you're intrigued by this comment, I wouldn't actually recommend capital in the 21st century unless you've studied economics. I'd go with his book, A Brief History of Equality, which is aimed at a wider audience.
I think the average Redditor has absolutely no idea that there is a difference between income and wealth, and that forcing someone to liquidate their wealth is completely impractical and moronic.
They twist the words, taxed at 100%, from a quote that he didn't actually say. Simply put, this is false. You essentially arguing that the government should seize the remaining funds until you reach $999 million? Matthews turned to the independent U.S. Senator from Vermont who also caucuses with Democrats and helped them win a narrow majority in the upper house of Sanders affirmed. You may disagree with me, but that's okay. I believe people can survive on $999 million. They can survive perfectly fine, and my hasn't even called for or proposed a tax. He's merely responding with a shrug to the interviewer's ridiculous assertion. Almost no one on the planet reports having $1 billion annual income. This is all contained in multiple assets. Bernie merely shrugged off a crude and perhaps laden remark, and now everyone is working up a fuss about how Bernie wants a 100% tax. He hasn't actually said that. His policy perspective, or the viewpoint he expresses in that interview, is a return to tax rates as they were under Eisenhower, which is entirely logical.
Why is a Chris Wallace quote being attributed to Bernie Sanders?
He didn't say that though. He's been misquoted all over the internet. If you can, find the actual interview.
Bernie actually didn't say that.
Man, he didn't say that. He gave an interview and responded vaguely to a question about billionaires. I'm so tired of having to tell people to read the actual interview. Come on y'all, we know better than this by now.
Greater than you don't have to be super rich to do this. Anyone * can legally hide their money. The problem is that 90% plus of the population don't have the discretionary income to hide away like that. It's all consumed by just living, mortgage, car payments, insurances, data lines, and the scores. And scores of nickel and dime subscriptions, fees, and unbundling faced by just living. I only say those things at all because there are often people who jump into conversations like this and leave it at the first sentence. Full stop. Confusing the technicality ability with the fiscal ability.
Correct. A lot of the very wealthy have a decent amount of their value in stocks, and it would be tricky to include that. They only get taxed when selling them. Edit. There can be taxes when getting the stocks as compensation depending on how it is done. They still are able to borrow against those stocks as they grow, buy more and borrow against that. But they do take out loans with the stock as collateral. That isn't treated as income and is not taxed. They keep taking out larger loans to pay off the previous ones until eventually they cash out, or more likely, they do it until they die. Really, the whole system needs to be overhauled to discourage some of the insane amounts of wealth and resource hoarding that is going on. Doing something like taxing at 100% after a certain level probably wouldn't be able to be applied to lots of these practices for reasons plenty others are pointing out. Ultimately, we need a system that encourages them to pay their workers more and essentially spend more of their profits. I see how just cutting them off at a certain point sounds like it would work, but I doubt it would. Edit. Here is a solid article on this. As others have pointed out, this is just one of many ways they can avoid taxes and continue to generate more. Also, the comment from Bernie is being taken pretty out of context. No one is seriously proposing we confiscate the wealth of anyone with over $1 billion.
Billionaires are out there taking loans using their stock values as collateral. It's a bonkers system and needs to be readdressed.
Unpopular opinion on Reddit. I don't think this is true. You hear the term, temporarily embarrassed millionaire, parodied all the time on Reddit, and I think that's more of a mythical strawman than anything. That's used to make the other side seem instead of just admitting that people have different values and lived and currently live in heavily red, Trump country, and have never met anyone that is against raising taxes on the rich because they think they will be rich one day too. I've met people that are against raising taxes on the rich because think the government is inefficient and will waste the dislike the government and think the money will go to things they are against, i.e. think Planned Parenthood type, think that if you tax the rich too much people will stop caring about working harder and we'll have less innovations. Whether it is right or wrong, I've definitely heard the opinion that we wouldn't have the computer innovation that we have today if we taxed millionaires, billionaires heavily because Gates and Jobs would have stopped trying to grow once they weren't earning. I've never heard someone say, that will me over after I make my malicious way. To try and discredit the other side, it's bad faith arguing, putting your own words in someone else's mouth and then arguing against those because it's easier that way. You don't have to think arguments 1, 2, or 3 are valid, but they are different arguments than, I might be rich one day.
I know, referring to up.
Bernie them 100% above one not liquid pay. About 30 to 40% of my paycheck goes poof before I even see it. That is more than Netflix paid the entire 2022. So the $400 they take out of my check is more than billionaires and their companies pay. Charge them.
They never have to touch. Their people are taught to live off debt, middle class is taught to never get into, and the poor can never get out of a world we built for the ruling class.
The day I learned this was the day I became somewhat of a radical. I was working in the tech industry and spending a week in Austin. I'm not from the US, for I was a member, because of my job, of this self-flagellating private club for young creatives, and they happened to have a location in Austin, so I went to drink at the bar one night and met this former Facebook, a big grin on his face and the ugliest $1 million watch you can imagine. You don't have to imagine, just Google Richard Mill. He bragged openly about scamming the tax man through perpetual credit, and even decided to lay out a 10-step tutorial for the entire process for me. A random stranger at a was the final straw for me. The ultra-wealthy. They deserve nothing but fury.
Yeah, it was a fairly casual informal interview where Bernie said there shouldn't even be billionaires, and the interviewer said, "What do we do? Tax everything 100% over $999 million. And Bernie was like, "Sure, why not?" and kept talking. This whole thing is so effing dumb. It's not like he threw a special press conference in front of tens of thousands of people to stand on a soapbox and make a proclamation of his official tax policy, etc.